The webinar is now recording.
All right. I'll go ahead and start with some Zoom guidance if that works.
That'd be great, thank you.
All right. And thanks to those of you online who have been waiting. We've had a little technical difficulty tonight. So my name is Joanna Bloom and I'm serving as the technical host for this meeting. We'll start by just running over some of the virtual meeting rules that we follow. These rules are in place to find a balance between transparency with community members and security that minimizes disruptions. We do need a full name associated with each person's participation in open or public comment, and we cannot unmute you without it. If your full name is not currently displayed, or when you come up, please change it, or you can send it to me in the Q&A box, and I'm happy to change it for you. There is no chat feature for this meeting. The Q&A function is enabled and can be used to address technical questions only. If you have any difficulty with the Q&A function, you're welcome to text me at 303-817-1742. Members of the public may be unable to control the audio or video features. Video is limited to city officials, employees, and invited speakers only. I will unmute you when you're recognized to speak. If you're on the phone, you may need to press *6 to unmute yourself. You can indicate your desire to participate in open or public comment by using the raise hand function. You'll find this feature in the participant box at either the top or bottom of your screen. If you've joined us by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. I'll call your name when it's your turn to speak and announce the name of the next speaker on deck. After I've unmuted you, please say your first and last name, and a 3-minute timer will be displayed and will start once you begin your comments. Thanks so much for your participation.
So it's up to me now. Back to you. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for your patience for us getting started a couple of minutes late. But we are here. It is March 20th. We have all of our board members present. And the second item on our agenda after convening the meeting is approval of our February meeting minutes. Any comments, questions from board members? If no, entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the February meeting minutes.
Yes, thank you.
Another second.
Thank you. All in favor? Great. And that takes us to our next agenda item, which is our public comment session.
All right, and I do see we have a number of hands up. We have 5 hands up, and did you want to distinguish this is just for open comment, not on the agenda item for this evening?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, and then you can help clarify if it's not clear, but we will have 2 public comment opportunities this evening. So this item on the agenda is for public comment on things that are not part of the agenda. We will have a separate public comment opportunity specific to our public hearing and consideration of the Upper Goose Creek and 2 Mile Canyon Creek flood mitigation study, which is the next item on the agenda. So if folks want to speak to that item specifically, we'd ask that you hold off until we reach the public comment portion of that part of the agenda tonight.
Great, thanks so much. So I still do see 4 hands up for open comment, not related to Upper Goose 2 Mile. If I do call on you and you would like to speak about Upper Goose 2 Mile, you can just indicate that when I call your name. Karen, do you have a clock available?
You have that? Yeah, I can share that.
And I have first up to speak is Peggy Bashline, followed by Lynn Siegel. Peggy, I'm going to try to unmute you now. You should be able to speak in just a moment. Peggy, are you able to unmute yourself? I see that the mute function has turned off. Can you hear us? Peggy, we can't quite hear you yet. Although I do show your microphone is unmuted. We're going to go ahead and go to the next speaker, but we'll try you again in just a moment, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and mute you, Ms. Bashline, and then we will come back. Our next speaker is Lynn Siegel. Lynn, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Joanna, can I go after the others?
Yes, did you want to speak for open comment, Lynn?
Yes, can I go after the others?
I believe that's a RAB decision, board.
Yeah, that would be fine. I don't have any concern with that. That's
Okay.
fine, Lynn.
Great, we'll come back in just a moment. All right, Peggy, we are up again. I will call on Tim Holbrook next. Peggy, did you want to go ahead and try again? I do show you as unmuted, but we cannot hear you. Let me see. Peggy, why don't you text me if you're able at 303-817-1742. I'll go ahead and put that in the Q&A, and then we'll try to troubleshoot what's happening. I apologize for the difficulty. I'm going to go ahead and put you back on mute, and then I'll go to Tim Holbrook, and then Kirk Vincent is on deck after Tim. All right, Tim, you should be able to unmute now.
Okay, can anyone hear me now?
We can hear you.
Very good. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I do have comments on the mitigation plan for 2 Mile later on, but I would like to make some comments that I believe would apply to all of the drainages in Boulder, if you'd permit me the 3 minutes. I would just like the board to know that I was privileged to participate in the Citizens Working Group to help provide input, including the prioritization matrix for the recently approved Stormwater and Flood Master Plan. Thank you very much for that opportunity. And in so doing, I became aware of many things, and that's why I'm making the recommendation to the board this evening. The recommendation I would like to suggest is that the RAB board recommend 3 things to City Council. Number 1, the city send a letter to property owners that are adjacent to creeks that have frontage to the creeks of Boulder, including 2 Mile, with a figure that shows exactly how to maintain the creek, because my understanding is it's not the city's responsibility. It's not the responsibility of the Mile High Flood District. And those are the things that need to be done. Number 2, I'd like them to change the city code, or recommend to the council that they change the city code 11-5-15 to include channel maintenance instead of a very unclear statement about rubbish and clearing of obstructions. Number 3, I'd like them to suggest to council that they enforce the city code once it is changed. And in the meantime, enforce these changes to include channel maintenance by using city code 11-5-16. Why are these recommendations needed? Well, at least for the projects I'm aware of, the priority of this project compared to all the other ones in Boulder is unknown. The funding sources for the full completion of the construction is unknown. And the schedule, therefore, is quite unknown. In fact, it could take many, many years for this project that we're talking about tonight, 2 Mile, or any of the other projects in Boulder, have those issues as well. And finally, the capacity is also unknown for some of these drainages. Besides all the changes in the watersheds and the severity of storms increasing. So those factors drive the recommendations that I just said, that the city send a letter to property owners advising them it is their responsibility to maintain channels. Flow. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Tim. We're gonna go to Kirk Vincent next, and then Peggy will try again. I did put my cell phone number in the Q&A if you would like to try that. Kirk Vincent, you should be able to unmute.
Can you hear me?
We
Can.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Kirk Vincent here with the South Platte Basin Roundtable, formerly a RAB member, and I know that the serving on these volunteer boards is a lot of work, particularly considering terms of 5 years. And so I suspect later in the meeting you'll do your best to sufficiently embarrass Tricia Oath. And so I want to add to that to say that, Madam Chair, I thank you for your service on RAB and the state. And also that it was a pleasure to serve with you on RAB. Thank you.
The feeling's mutual, Kirk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll try Peggy one more time. And then Lynn, you are the last person indicating to speak. Peggy, I do show you as unmuted. Do you want to try to speak? I'm so sorry we're having difficulty. I can go ahead and put the RAB email in the Q&A. I can also try to work with you later on in the meeting if you did want to make a comment. Oh, I'm going to type my number right now. And if you would like to make a comment again under the agenda item, we can try to get there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mute you, and then we're going to go to Lynn.
That was very kind of you, Joanna, to let her speak later. I wanted to discuss the issue of atmospheric rivers, which California is being blasted with right now, and which was the cause basically of our 2013 flood, the 1,000-year rain. And we're headed for more of these, of course, and yet RAB doesn't have any say about the development of CU South. You know what Gilbert White said? The more you develop, the more you have to fight, drowning, because you put man in the pathway of the catastrophes and more to come. And then you have water purity and treatment issues when you get major flooding. And then you've got the interceptors and the infrastructure that needs to be redone, because of major geologic changes and over time, deferred maintenance, which I have plenty of on my house. I know what the expense of that stuff is. Why are we doing this? Why are we not having some say under open space mountain parks of the disposal of the land so that CU can build a campus when we're already way overcrowded with people? People cause problems with water, more and more people. I mean, I hate to, at the risk of stating the obvious and sounding condescending, these are simple truths that we need to be very cognizant of. And the expenses of these things are outrageous. When you've got the inflation of energy from Excel and from gas, from the war in Ukraine, and from the pandemic combined together, you've got a perfect storm. And then you have the banks failing. It's water is life, right? We all know that. And if we don't have water, we don't have anything. And we're headed straight towards disaster economically, being able to handle these kind of things. You know, on 2206 Pearl, the development that's supposed to be for the missing middle, which it's not because it's market rate in reality. There was one person that complained about the sewer in that area is already way overloaded and has trashed out a number of houses there. We don't need more development subsidies to CU and to 2206 Pearl. They're harming our water supply. Done.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. So I do see that the batch lines are still trying to comment. I am going to ask them to unmute. We are trying to troubleshoot over my phone. If we can't get this round to work, it might be that I will give them the telephone number for the meeting and then hopefully they can call in, hopefully on a separate line, and we can try to tag team that way. I just can't get my fingers moving fast enough. So let me go ahead and try to ask them to unmute one more time. Okay, so you should be able to unmute now. And if this doesn't work, I will go ahead and put the Zoom call number in the Q&A, and then we will get your comment that way. I still show you muted, but I do see it toggling. If you want to try one more time, it might unmute. So I apologize for the difficulty. Let me go ahead and put the number in, and I will keep an eye on the phone, and you can press *9 to raise your hand when the time comes. And I believe you are able to comment under the Upper Goose 2 Mile agenda item. Beyond that, I don't see any other hands raised for public comment.
Okay, thanks, Joanna, for your help with that. So then we'll move on to agenda item number 4, which is our public hearing and consideration of a recommendation on Upper Goose and 2 Mile Canyon Creek flood mitigation study. I think we'll start first with, I know we have at least one board member who wanted to make a disclosure. So we'll want to give an opportunity for that to happen, and any other board members who may have anything else to say. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted, on advice with utility staff and the city attorney, to disclose that I do own property and live within the Upper Goose Creek 2 Mile floodplain. And so I just wanted to make sure, disclose that before we get into the discussion and the vote later tonight. So thank you.
Thanks, John. Anyone else? So I think with that, it's over to you.
Thank you, Tricia, and good evening, everyone. I'm Joe Tadiucci, and I'm the Director of the Utilities Department. And our first item tonight is the public hearing and action item for the board on the Upper Goose Creek and 2 Mile flood mitigation plan. I'll make a few introductory comments here, but I might introduce the other staff that are in the room with me here. Across the way there is Chris Douglas. He's the manager of our engineering group that does all the capital projects across all 3 utilities. And then on my right are Debbie Fisher, who is one of our new project managers in our stormwater and flood engineering group. She'll be leading most of the discussion tonight. And then most of you know Brandon Coleman, who is the supervisor of the flood and storm engineering group. So before I turn it over to them, just a few introductory remarks. And I think you heard during the public comment a few times the plan that we're talking about tonight was referred to as a project. And just to make a distinction there, Debbie in her presentation will describe the planning cycle for these flood mitigation efforts. But what is before RAB tonight is a flood mitigation plan. And the mitigation plan sets the kind of the holistic plan for an entire drainage. So the board is not being asked to approve final projects or funding tonight. It's the plan itself. And then upon a RAB recommendation, and if we have a successful council approval of the plan, we'll then be able to bring forward individual design and construction projects as part of our capital improvement program. So I know there were a number of emails to the board during the day where people were asking for more detail on things, and that detail would normally come out at a subsequent phase. But later in the year, you will see some funds in the capital improvement program that are allocated for this, provided we get the successful votes. And about 50% of those projects that we would bring forward will be for the open drainage and drainage way areas, and then about 50% of them for the piped stormwater projects. And our flooded stormwater utility includes both of those. And then, as we had discussed with the board last year when we were successful with the approval of the stormwater and flood master plan, we will bring all these projects through that project prioritization tool as they come forward. So that's what I have, and I think I'm going to Brandon next. So Brandon.
Great, thanks, Joe. So I'm Brandon Coleman. I'm the engineering manager in the storm flood utility. And I just wanted to kind of open up for us. We've had a lot of turnover in our group recently, and Debbie is a new PM who's taken on this project for us. So I did just want to say thanks to the community and particularly the neighborhoods in the Upper Goose 2 Mile watershed for all the community engagement we've had around this planning effort. It's been a long process, and we've had a really active engagement period, which we really appreciate as a utility. So the community engagement and the mitigation plan started in 2015. We've had multiple outreach meetings. We've had over 800 questionnaires. We've done website updates. We've done neighborhood walks, virtual and in-person community meetings, and they've all been really well attended, which is really important to us as a utility, and also a huge thanks to the community. In our most recent one, we had an information session just a few weeks ago to go over these recommendations, and we had over 50 people attend. And it was our first in-person event since the pandemic. So just did want to say a huge thanks to everybody who lives in the drainage way, who's been really involved. I think it really makes a better project for us as a utility. And that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie and let her introduce herself and walk through the presentation.
So
Now you can start presenting.
Looks like it's going to be one of those nights.
There you go.
Yes.
no. There we go.
There you go.
No, you just flip. Sorry.
So stop sharing real quick. All right, 1 second here.
I will take this moment to chime in and let the Bash Lions know that I can see their hand raised, and I do believe their interest is in Upper Goose 2 Mile, so I apologize if I'm wrong about that, but I'll go ahead and call on you again during the public comment portion for Upper Goose 2 Mile, and that is the next opportunity for public comment.
While we're waiting here, I might just speak to a few of the emails that the board received today, and look in this direction, so you'll have to let me know if the screen comes up. There was one community member who referenced a conversation that I think they had with someone else in the community, and there were concerns about wastewater infrastructure and backups, and that we weren't paying attention to that. I would say for me, and last month you had the year in review from RAB. That has been actually one of the bright spots of our capital investment. And we have, as a result of the wastewater backups in the 2013 flood, we have advanced a number of projects that have actually been constructed. Last year, we completed the Baseline and Foothills major sewer project. The year before that, we did Goose Creek. And then in this year's CIP, we'll be talking about the Main Interceptor project, which is, I could argue, one of the most important projects in utilities. So took care of one email, and it looks like the stuff is working. So we'll go to Debbie.
Efficient use of time. Good to go?
Yep, you're good.
Everybody hear me?
Yep.
Boulder has the designation of being the #1 flash flood risk community in the state of Colorado. The last major pre-2013 flood was in the 1960s. The last flood of record that was actually a designated 100-year flood event was in 1894. The 2013 flood resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars of damages in the city of Boulder. In the past, many homes and structures were built in the low, shallow banks of the floodplains of the creeks that historically provided adequate flood conveyance and natural wildlife corridors. Little, if any, understanding or thought was given to the fact that construction in these floodplains diminished conveyance capacity for floodwaters and jeopardized property, the health, sustainability, and quality of the ecosystem. Consequently, flood, water, and wildlife were squeezed into smaller and smaller areas. Eventually, the wildlife found a way to adapt to the diminished and non-native habitat, but floodwater was forced out of the natural stream corridors and into streets and private properties. Today, many of the stream corridors have disappeared completely. Countless residents and habitats were subjected to flooding, debris flows, and damages in the 2013 flood event. And although things have settled down and appear to have recovered, the danger of additional flooding and destruction of the wildlife habitat is still present. The citizens clearly see the need for improvements of the stormwater system as evidenced by support for the increases in the stormwater fee. The multitudes of stormwater projects being completed will alleviate small local storms, but will not prevent or accommodate extreme floods. Tonight, we are going to present some information and a mitigation plan to correct many of these issues. Plan for resiliency into the future, to prepare for and accommodate floodwater, restore habitats, and lower risk to life and property, consistent with community values, the Greenway Masters Plan, and the Comprehensive Stormwater Master Plan. Boulder operates the flood management program on a cyclical type of program. Over here on the left, you see that we have this is the entire creeks system for all of Boulder. There are 16 major streams, and tonight we're talking about only 2 of them, 2 Mile Canyon and Goose Creek. So the way this cyclical program works is first, the mapping is created, and this was done for this watershed in 2015, post 2013 flood. Next, a mitigation plan is put into place, and that's where we are right now. We're talking about this mitigation plan to identify and evaluate the issues of the flood mitigation. And then the third phase is design and construction. After design and construction occurs, then we go back to mapping and update the mapping again. The comprehensive flood and stormwater master plan that was talked about was approved in September of 2022 after multiple community engagement opportunities and several outcomes were published in that plan. There's a high priority to prioritize project to do the greatest good for the city of Boulder first and provide equitable construction in these projects. And we want to be aware of climate change, prepare for the future as much as possible, and then continue to be able to maintain systems that we have. And of course, fund the program. This is just a quick timeline of some of the events that have occurred in Upper Goose and 2 Mile watersheds. There were many public engagement, open houses and workshops, public meetings, questionnaires, public comments, outreaches, and all this information was tabulated and put in to consideration for this mitigation plan. Just quickly, we're going to review a little bit of the terminology and understand floodplains just a little bit for the benefit of people who may not be entirely sure what we're talking about. So the 1% annual chance storm is often referred to as the 100-year storm or the 100-year floodplain. And it's really misleading. According to FEMA, the definition for a 1% annual chance storm is all land areas subject to inundation by floodwaters approximately 1 foot deep or more from the 1% chance flood event. The term 100 years is misleading. It's a recurrence interval, which is 1/100th. So it's a 1% chance of being equaled or exceeded in any given year. This is determined on statistical analysis. It's in a system called frequency analysis. It's based on past observations and extrapolation and available records of rainfall and stream flow that we currently have. In Boulder, the defining 1% annual chance storm is a short duration, high intensity storm, something that we are normally used to as our intense summer thunderstorms. And that is an equivalent, depending on the area in Boulder, of somewhere between 2 and 3 inches of rainfall per hour. That's actually what FEMA uses to define the 1% chance flood. The 2013 flood was something entirely different. It was a very long duration, lower intense storm, lasting anywhere from 3 to 8 days in some areas. And Boulder received over 18 inches of rain in some areas. So very, very different kinds of floods. Interesting fact is that a home in a floodplain in the life of a 30-year mortgage has a 26% chance of being flooded. And nearly 40% of the flood damages are outside the map floodplain. So we're considering all these things when we're proposing flood improvements. Some definitions specific to Boulder is a high hazard zone, which means that the floodwater is 4 feet deep or more, or that the product of the velocity in feet per second times the water depth in feet equals 4 or more. When this happens, cars can float and people can be swept off their feet. So this is the most dangerous area. And down on the lower part of this slide, you see in green the sections of the cities that are actually, no, I'm sorry, green is the flood conveyance. We're going to cover that. But the pink is the high hazard area. So several sections of the city already are in these high hazard zones. So in order to do this mitigation plan, we considered lots of community values and considerations. The overriding message was support for flood mitigation. Understanding there are multitudes of private property impacts. Really important to maintain the wildlife corridors. Maintenance needs have have always been there and will always be there. It was very clear there will be no impact to Long's Garden. There will be no detention, no facilities built in Long's Garden. It was also very clear that the community did not want to see detention put in North Boulder Park. General preference was to convey 100-year flows in the open channels. We considered roadway conveyance and of course, neighborhood impacts. This is the watershed you see on the left outlined by the yellow line. It encompasses 2 Mile Canyon Creek and Goose Creek. The major pathways for 2 Mile Canyon Creek are shown in pink. The major pathways for Upper Goose Creek are shown in blue. On the upper right, you see the areas within this watershed subject to flooding, which as you can see is almost all of the watershed. So Goose Creek originates on the west edge of the city in North Boulder Park and then follows some open channels and some roadways down toward Folsom. And 2 Mile Canyon Creek originates at the city limits. And as you can see, it encompasses a much larger portion of the watershed. This is part of the problem of 2 Mile Canyon Creek. All these pathways are split. There's multiple split flows coming through streets, through people's houses, through the neighborhoods. There's just not a well-controlled corridor for floods to flow through the part of 2 Mile Canyon Creek. And there's on the order of over 1,000 structures at risk of flooding. This is the entire watershed again, and for purposes of the mitigation plan, it was divided into reaches. There are 4 reaches in Upper 2 Mile, or 2 Mile Canyon, excuse me, and 6 reaches considered in Upper Goose Creek. Just a quick little summary of damages, costs, and losses. This was in 2020 dollars. Structures in the 100-year floodplain are in the hundreds, both for 2 Mile Canyon Creek and Upper Goose Creek, with nearly $200 million worth of damage. With the mitigation plan, we will be able to remove around 500 or more structures from the floodplain. The cost that you see here, the watershed total cost of around $43 million, again, was estimates for construction for this mitigation plan in 2013 dollars. So some highlights of the plan. This is basically what is in mind for open channels. First of all, safety, lower the water surface elevations, decrease the extent of the floodplain, and remove structures from the high hazard zone designation. Now, that doesn't mean we're tearing structures down. It means the structures will no longer be in the high hazard zone designation. Creek restoration will include natural bottoms and varying bank slopes and treatments, trying to follow the natural slope and horizontal alignment of creeks where we can, removing the debris, sediment, and any invasive species, and then restoring it all with native species and good sustainable riparian habitats. The other part of the mitigation plan where things need to be piped through streets where there just simply is no longer an open channel to follow, these will largely be concrete box structures, large concrete box structures. We understand there's lots of utilities in the way. Those will be accommodated, relocated, protected, restored. No one will be losing their utilities for any great length of time. There were multiple themes that recurred when we did the community outreach. The majority of responses were favorable to move forward with this mitigation plan and construct as many as quickly as possible. Private property impacts are the major concern. There are individual impacts, neighborhood impacts, all sorts of things. Very important to the entire city of Boulder to protect and honor the wildlife, and we get that. That's part of the plan. Wildlife corridors will be restored and enhanced. Again, no detention in North Boulder Park or Longs Garden, and ongoing maintenance needs. There's multiple benefits. First of all, protect properties. Flood insurance policies are required for some properties within the floodplain. Rates are set based on risk. As properties are removed from the floodplain and improved and people can recover parts of their backyards, they either no longer need flood insurance or the ability to put things back in the property that's no longer in the designated floodplain will come about. Sheds and fences and auxiliary buildings and so forth could then be built in these areas because they're not in the floodplain anymore, therefore not subject to floodplain restrictions and permitting. Maintenance of creek channels is part of the desire and ongoing funding in the city of Boulder. Increased emergency access is really important in high hazard areas where vehicles cannot get through in emergencies. That's a big safety concern, and there are emergencies other than flooding. There are medical emergencies and fires and things like that. Also improving and enhancing the ecosystem and restoring native habitat is really important in this plan. The challenges, of course, are cost benefits and the space limitations that we've already discussed. And construction's never a pleasant thing for anyone to endure. Totally understood. There's more information available for everyone. We have a website, a story map. This is the link to that. It'll lead you step by step through the mitigation plan. There's lots of frequently asked questions and other information on that website. So where do we go from here? Well, if recommended by RAB and it goes to City Council, then we will proceed with this mitigation plan. As Joe said, it's part of the CIP process to determine budget and scheduling and that sort of thing. In the remainder of 2023, if approved, we will be refining the conceptual designs and get consultants on board to come up with actual design plans. Of course, continued community engagement opportunities will be part of that. And construction, currently anticipating 2026, but yet to be determined. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. Let's open it up for questions.
I guess I'd like a little bit more clarification on what it actually is that we're trying to approve tonight. In terms of for the conceptual plan, I understand your three-part diagram there, but what is it that we're actually approving tonight that is different than what we will, we will be approving the details and some of the individual construction items of this later. But what's the actual plan that we're approving or voting on tonight?
So the plan that is before the board tonight is for the two drainages that actually come together and become one. And it's for the overall conceptual plan. I think Debbie showed a slide of 6 different reaches on the Upper Goose Creek and 4 on 2 Mile. And if you go through the story map and the project memo and the attachments for each one of those reaches, it lays out different options for how those will be addressed in the future.
So the chart that was in the summary memo identifying those different beach areas, it's just the sort of conceptual approach that we're talking about tonight.
Yes.
I'm not talking about any of the details that were raised in some of those communications that we had earlier today about tunnels and maintenance issues and so forth, that's all going to be spelled out in more detail that we would look at and consider later.
Yeah, the projects would come forward as part of the capital improvement program. Starting in May, there will be a 3-meeting series where we'll show you a 6-year window of what we have planned in each of the 3 utilities. And council is scheduled to take action on this mitigation plan in May. And so if we're successful, we would bring forward some of the capital improvement projects that are ready to go as part of that. And we would do outreach and meet with community members on the details of that as we go.
I think you mentioned that the cost estimates, which I guess are very conceptual, were from 2013.
2020.
Oh, okay, okay.
It's in $2020.
$2020. Okay, so that basically is just an effort to kind of compare the benefits. And so the eliminating the damage risk, the 196 million, and the what a very early estimate based on these mitigation approaches might be in terms of costs.
Yeah. Yeah, we estimated around 43 million for improvements and around $200 million of properties that's protected from doing this.
Yeah, so those numbers are intended to give the board and the community a sense of scale, and more detailed estimates will come forward as we do the CIP projects.
Following up on Amy's question, I did wonder about the table that you showed regarding the costs. There was a table listed structures in the 100-year flood zone, structures in the 500-year flood zone, and then estimated flood damages. And it wasn't clear to me 2 things. First, of those costs, the roughly $196 million, is that the saved cost of potential flood damage or structures just in the 100-year floodplain, or the combined saved cost for those in both the 100 and 500-year flood?
Sort of a complicated answer. FEMA has a formula and a way that they determine what cost damages are to structures based on level of flooding, depth of flooding, and that sort of thing. And so I got some slides I could show you how FEMA does that, but in a nutshell, it's their formula for deciding how they assign damages. For instance, upper floors of structures are not considered to be part of the damages. Foundations are not necessarily considered part of the damages, but anything that's below the flood elevation is a certain percentage of the value of the property. So the properties are probably closer to $1 billion, but the damages that are assessed through FEMA's way of doing it is what this number represents.
I think what you were getting at was the modeling of those damages based on the 100-year or the 500-year, and my impression is it's the 100-year when we do these.
Right.
But
Yeah, so we compared the damages for the 100-year event because that's our level of services or utility, but we would expect to see some benefits in the 500-year flood event, but really focusing on the 100-year for these improvements.
Thank you. Another question I had is the timeline that was shown in the presentation was somewhat stunning that it's such a lengthy period of time. And I'm curious, we're approaching 10 years since the 2013 flood. And I know a lot of us throughout the community are in one or more of our 16 watersheds. And they're wondering what hope there is of trying to get these urgent problems solved in light of this lengthy period of time. Even from, say, the start of the timeline that was shown of actually working conscientiously on this particular set of drainages. It's a more rhetorical question than anything, but I share the general public's concern of the lengthy duration that it takes to get from where we started on this to where we are tonight, which is a long way yet still, as you said, from actually constructing and truly mitigating. How can we do better?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think one big step in that direction was the flood and stormwater master plan that was approved last year. You received some emails and people are concerned about private property impacts. And that's totally understandable. And then there's a desire for people to have the protection sooner. And there's just been a tendency in the way we've gone about these of projects being pit against each other or drainages being pit against each other, or they get mired in controversy because of landowner issues and things like that. So our hope is that with the completion of the stormwater and flood master plan that addressed some of those things and provided the utility a framework for prioritizing projects going forward. I think flood projects are always going to be a little bit messy, but hopefully less so, and we'll have a more prescribed way of doing that. In the intervening time, since the timeline that Debbie showed, we've had a pandemic, and at one point last year, we were down to just Brandon in the stormwater and flood engineering. And I'll be honest, the intensity of some of these projects have taken a toll on staff. And so just making sure that people that work for us on these projects have a safe space to do their work and make their recommendations while recognizing that we're public servants and our work is subject to critique. That's a part of it as well. And so I'm really happy with the progress that Chris and Brandon have made in hiring a number of people to do this work going forward. The last thing I would say is we've spent a lot of time on these planning studies because of the cycle that Debbie described. And I know Brandon was really motivated to see some things get constructed. And so we're sort of hitting that phase where the community should start to see action on some of these projects. So a bit of a lengthy answer, but there's a lot to it.
One other question goes, I may more for the benefit of Amy and I, since we're involved in the earlier parts of the process, but how would you rate the priority or the immediacy or the sort of timeliness of the project in this particular drainage vis-a-vis several of the other ones that have got similar problems? And how are you kind of prioritizing those? And is this one of the ones that's sort of at the head of the list? Or where does this project stand vis-a-vis the rest of the city and all the other 16 or 14 sort of drainage areas?
I might defer to Brandon for part of that, but when we start the capital improvement process and the 3-meeting series with the board this year to discuss that, one of the things we'll be showing you is the prioritization from last year's flood master plan of all these drainages and what's being planned. So you'll be able to see them side by side. We were very careful when we were showing the master plan last year to just have generic labels on drainages, but they were actual drainages. And if I'm remembering right, this was one of the ones that we tested, and I think it's going to score very high. The needs are high here for a variety of reasons.
And I'll just tack on just some hard numbers. So that approach you saw, that life cycle planning approach you saw, was part of our 2004 comprehensive flood and stormwater master plan. Since 2004, we've completed 10 of the 16 major drainage ways. And we have these 2 with Upper Goose 2 Mile from a mitigation planning standpoint. And we also have Skunk Bluebell Kings, which was coming along in parallel with this, which you'll be seeing ideally within a year's time or so. But that'll complete a lot of our mitigation planning efforts across the city and really moving into that design and construction phase. That's why the project prioritization is so critical for us, because we don't have money to do all the projects. So doing the greatest good first is really the goal of that prioritization effort. And we'll be talking about that hopefully during the CIP planning process.
A couple of questions. The the maintenance question has come up a lot with public comment and I think a lot of the reason people are so concerned about it is current maintenance and how it falls on property owners. And most property owners probably don't know that, at least that's my understanding. Or it's expensive to do and difficult to do. And so I guess the question, and I wasn't able to see this in the plan, but when the mitigation work is done, is the maintenance still falling on the property owners? Or what's the maintenance plan once the projects are actually completed?
Yeah, I can speak to part of that, and Brandon and Debbie might know more the property ownership situation, but that maintenance was one of the big themes of the flood master plan last year. And working with our maintenance manager and Joanna Bloom, who's a co-host here tonight, and our deputy director, we have been developing a plan to enhance the resources that we have in utilities maintenance. Over the years, in water and wastewater, we have brought a lot of the work in-house that contractors used to do, and medium to small size projects, we can do those more cost efficiently, we believe, on our own. The staffing and the resourcing that we've had in the flood utility has been allowed us more to just do hotspots and address emerging issues and meet basic maintenance agreements like we have with irrigation ditch companies. But the staffing proposal and resourcing proposal that we're bringing forward as part of the 2024 budget will allow us to cycle through the whole system on a routine number of years. And Brandon or Joanna, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, we heard a lot from the Upper Goose 2 mile communities about maintenance as well, and there's a lot of frustration around there. And as a city, we actually don't own access to a lot of these major drainage ways, so we can't get into a lot of these drainage ways, and it does fall on the property owner. Where we do have maintenance responsibilities, we've tried to get in since this, but anytime we implement one of these large CIP programs, easement acquisition is a key component of it. So we consider maintenance as we do design for these large mitigation projects. We'd like to make sure we can access them in the future to be able to maintain any infrastructure that we put in as part of this. And the other thing just to mention is that speaks a little bit to why we selected open channels and natural channels approach. So we're seeing the Mile High Flood District move towards approach that they call high functioning, low maintenance streams. So when you use the more natural systems to convey floodwaters, ideally that is more self-healing and it limits your maintenance a little bit. So doesn't completely remove maintenance, but ideally it helps manage the expectations for maintenance.
Can I just follow up real quick? So Joe, are you saying regardless if this plan moves forward at all, there's still a plan to have the city conduct maintenance on all these channels in the future?
Yeah, separate from this plan, we're bringing forward a budget proposal that we still will need property rights to access drainages. And so there will still be incongruous sections of creeks and drainages, but as Brandon said, when we bring the projects forward, between the combination of those two things, we hope to be able to address that.
One more question. Yeah. On that, so I had a question about the easements required both for maintenance and then the project itself. And in the plan, I noticed there were some sections where there was drainage easement was listed as a con, and then there's drainage easement acquisition. And I was just curious what the distinction is between those, and what does it actually mean for a property owner to have acquisition easement happen on their property? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I can help with that one. So typically we work with each individual property owner to identify the limits of the projects and also negotiate if there's individual impacts to the property. We try and incorporate those into the designs the best we can while still meeting the goals of the design. And then that flood easement limits what can happen in that area into the future, and also gives the city right to access it for future maintenance as well. And any replacement or repairs that would need to happen. So that's typically how it goes. A lot of individual property owners have concerns specific to their property. So it's not always a consistent cookie cutter approach you can take. So you do have to work with each property owner, but ultimately the goal of the project is the same across all of those properties.
I think Brandon, the Gregory Creek drainage that comes down from Flagstaff, kind of down by the library area, that one had a whole bunch of easement acquisition, like that's a huge part of that project.
Yep. And irregardless, kind of like Joe said, if we're going to do maintenance back there, we have to get the easements to be able to do maintenance back there. So we can do it in conjunction with these CIP projects, which is really efficient for us, rather than trying to target specific areas, and gives us a very linear feature that we can maintain in the future.
If you have property owners that are unwilling to participate in this, to the point that was brought up earlier by Tim, is there a standard that property owners, that's clear in terms of maintenance by property owners, and is that something that can be shared to RAB members and the public at large?
I guess, so he referenced the right codes. So we've worked with Tim. We know Tim, he referenced the right codes. He has an interest in maintenance along 2 Mile Canyon Creek. And there is code enforcement, which is a separate division from the utilities engineering department. So the best we can do is report out what we see. So we don't issue tickets or write letters or anything like that. That falls on a different division of the city. And we'd have to default to them probably to answer those types of questions. But we did recently get access to all of our major drainage ways across the city. So all 47 miles of them. And we completed a comprehensive assessment of all the streams across the city, whether we have access to address them or not, through our Boulder Urban Stream Health program. So we're really looking towards that data set to help advise us of where we need property acquisition, what major maintenance activities we need to do into the future. So that was a pretty large effort that we're glad to have completed this year.
But I think the big picture point is as we do these drainages and develop projects, that gets addressed. We negotiate with the property owners and get the access and are able to maintain in the future and improve that situation.
But is it easement acquisition or property acquisition? I've heard both terms be used.
Oh,
It depends. So there could be property acquisition, it could be just easement. Easements need to be agreed to.
I'll give you just an example on Gregory Canyon Creek. So we do have a program in the utility where we can acquire properties in the high hazard zone. And then that's a property acquisition, but we only work with willing sellers for that program. So for Gregory, we acquired about 4 properties in the high hazard, and the rest of the properties, 21 of the properties, we're going to need to get easements.
Got it.
So it's a combination of the two a lot of the times.
Do you have property owners who are resistive of granting the city easement rights?
We haven't gotten the details yet to be able to work with them yet, so I don't know if we can answer that. We've heard some concerns about private property owner impacts, as happens with a lot of these projects, but we haven't been able to advance the design to be able to have those negotiations with those individual property owners yet. So.
Do you mean in this area or more generally?
In this area, yeah.
And something that we will bring forward to these property owners is if we ask for an easement in the back of your property, and we can contain the 100-year flood within that easement, then the rest of your property is now removed from floodplain designation. Now you can do lots more with your property without floodplain permitting, without having to go through floodplain development, anything like that. It's treated as any other improvement to a property. So we've heard a number of concerns. Why can't I build a fence in my property? And why can't I put a shed? And that would give a lot of these property owners back that ability. We can get in there with the easement and restrict the floodplains to the width of those easements. So there's a really huge benefit for, it's a compromise. There's some room to put in the flood control, and you get back the use of the rest of your property no longer within the floodplain. And also if they are carrying flood insurance, it diminishes their need to do so. If they still want to carry flood insurance, it diminishes the premiums greatly. Also, there's quite a bit of evidence that when properties or large portions of properties or the buildings themselves can be removed from the floodplain designation from the mapped floodplain, the property values go up.
Right, and that raises another question about this. The value of the project, the costs and benefits, and FEMA's been making an effort more and more to look, and we talked about this with the master plan, looking at more than just property value in the prioritization. So I assume that then in the next step, this, equitable sort of adding a whole number of different criteria and lenses to the value of these projects will be added.
For sure. That was the crux of the outcome of the flood master plan. So I don't think the community will forgive us if we skip that step.
It seems like that could be a huge selling point for proceeding with this. And Debbie, thank you for articulating all the reasons why properties will benefit. Is there any way to come up with using reasonable assumptions on effects like decreases in the flood insurance and increases in property value to estimate the benefits of spending I think it was roughly $42 million to implement this? Are the benefits more than that to the community as a whole in this particular area?
Some of the benefits are non-monetary. Some of the benefits are the ability to do all the things within their property. So many people are now restricted from doing. Not sure how you monetize that particular part of it. It's difficult to make estimates through the NFIP of the actual flood insurance premium because they have a formula they use. And I just attended a class on that to see if I could figure out how to do exactly what you're asking. And basically at the end of the class, they said, you can't figure this out for yourself. We do it and tell you what it's going to be. So although I'd love to be able to do that, I don't think that I'm going to be able to fulfill that requirement.
It might be a fairly abstract calculation to try and do, but there are some tangible things that I have always found the post-project mapping to be quite striking when you see the difference in just area of impacted properties.
All right. Oh, no, I was gonna say, are we ready to?
Just
move
two
on?
quick follow-ups to
Okay.
that whole point. I was just curious if there's so there's 759 structures in the 100-year flood plain. Is the intent all of them will be applied in the map revision process? Will bring them all out of the 100-year flood zone? And the second part of the question is, there's one section of the 2-mile plan that's less than 100-year at this point. And I was just wondering what that means for both the mapping and then the project overall. If it looks like, the rest of the plan is 100-year for all these changes, except for that one section in 2-mile. So what does that mean for the plan? And then is there any estimates of the 759 structures? We hope, again, this is the Gordon's point of trying to help educate the public on the benefits of this. Are all of those going to be removed? Some portion of them? Curious if you-
527.
You're reminding me of a different question that came in about the number of structures listed in the executive summary versus what's in the table.
It's this.
I can explain that one.
And I think the quick
I think so.
response, I think the executive summary talks about 295 and the table 700, and it depends on whether we're looking at it through the eyes of FEMA or we're looking at some of those other things that Debbie mentioned, people who have basements and window wells and things like that.
Yeah, that's the discrepancy in the number of structures. So are you asking specifically why the upper portions of 2 Mile Canyon Creek are only less than the 100-year conveyance when the rest of the plan is 100-year?
No, I understand that. I was just curious what that means for the overall. In my mind, if you do everything 100-year, then everything's protected 100-year.
Okay.
You're protecting everyone. That one section, does that have implications for other sections?
It's good. It's going to preliminarily, we think from our conceptual plans, greatly pull in the limits of the 100-year as well. Given the space available and the desires of the community, it could very well mean that the structures are removed from the 100-year, but we won't really know for sure until we can get further along with preliminary design. But conceptually, whereas now a lot of the flooding spreads out because there's not a very well-defined channel, so it spreads toward the structures and into the structures. If we can put in a defined channel, we'll definitely narrow that corridor significantly. And the desire, of course, is to remove as many structures as possible from the floodplain designation. I don't have the exact numbers right now. We need to get into this in more detail to figure that out. But if, say, we could do something like a 50-year channel, that's not half. That's more like 3/4 of the ability to pull the floodplain in, because it's not linear. A 10-year storm is not 10% of a 100-year storm, and a 50-year storm is not half of a 100-year storm. It's significantly more. So it will have a very positive impact on all these properties, but we don't know exactly how many structures yet. Did that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right, we ready to move on to public comment portion? Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. I know we have a lot of members of the public who are here for this item tonight, which is great. I know I am looking forward to hearing from folks, and I'm sure my fellow board members are. I do, before we start, just want to say we very much look forward to and welcome comments on these issues, spirited debate about the plan, or and hearing different perspectives. Please do keep your comments focused on the issues and not personal attacks. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joanna. Are you ready for the public comment portion?
Yes, I believe so. Karen can help me out if I if I get this wrong. We will go to the bash lines again. Thank you for your patience, and that will start with the bash lines. I would just like to remind folks that are in attendance that would like to speak that if you're on the phone, you can press *6 to unmute yourself when I give you the cue, and you can press *9 to raise your hand virtually. And then go ahead. Otherwise, if you're on a computer, you can go ahead and virtually raise your hand, and I'll call you in the order that I see you on the screen. And I'll let you know who's on deck. So again, beginning with Peggy Bashline, and then we go to George Gerstle. And Peggy, I do see that you're unmuted, and I know we have a backup plan if we still can't hear you through this method. So Peggy, we are still having trouble hearing you. I am going to unmute Dennis in case you're able to speak through that computer. And then if not, I believe you have a representative that can speak.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Peggy, come in here.
Thanks so much for sticking with it.
In here.
All right. And Karen, I don't know if you want to do the timer. And as soon as you're ready, we can start the 3-minute timer.
But honey, I can't get to the thing to turn it on.
Just say what you want to.
No, I can't. I can't.
They can hear you.
I need my recording. It's right up there somewhere.
Okay, hold on. I have to make the screen smaller. Smaller.
Okay. All right. Tell me if you guys can hear this. Hold on. Dang, what happened?
Just
Make it go again. I don't have it on.
Just say how you feel.
We can hear you both, but we can't hear the recording. I'm so sorry.
She's not able to play it because it's behind
a bunch of other stuff. I think she went to get it. I'd like her just to read it.
Great. Is it all right if we move on and we'll come back to you again and we'll try again? You all were
She's
patient with
right
us
here.
the first
She's
time
got her
around.
screen. She's ready to talk.
Okay.
Oh, I'm gonna try to play this.
Okay.
Quote, Debbie Fisher. The animals are smart. They leave during construction, but they always come back as soon as the construction settles down. Where on earth do they go until construction settles, Debbie? Are you saying every fox and her young has a summer cottage in Louisville? Are you saying every owl or flicker can just pull out its wallet and rip a knothole in Niawat? How are they supposed to return after construction if our majestic trees are ripped from the roots? Has anyone ever tracked and documented these frightened and homeless animals? Your crocodile tears for our invincible wildlife remain an insult. A few years ago, we asked the city to remove minimal debris from the creek and repair one drain. Suddenly, like Russian tsars from the throne, we are commanded to accept the total gutting and cementing of our backyards, all for the good of the community. Utilities is rolling in money through our water bills and has nothing better to do than pretend it knows all that is weather and water. Suddenly, classifying us out of the floodplain is devious, and offering balsam homeowners tax breaks is selective and sinister. Here's a nice fresh carrot for you lovable gullibles. I count 10 indigenous narrowleaf cottonwoods on my easement. Each provides everything imaginable toward lush abundance. My arborist says my perfectly vital trees planted in 1952 can live to 400 years. So stop pretending all are at the end of their lives. Remove them and we become nothing but barren until your weaker grafted replacements take hold. By the way, the city's awkward mix of river with a prairie theme is so unnatural. My heart breaks for any deer trying to maneuver through and over the continuum of monstrous boulders. Democracy demands I have rights. Each person owning and paying for a basic such as land has willingly chosen his lot on earth. He inherently knows there are no guarantees against the fates and that planning as best he can toward options to eliminate peril come with his own personal decisions. Why should I lose the natural beauty of my home for 30 years to take on my neighbor's drainage? Just look at that perpendicular hill. It won't take a genius to know this vertical tower will need a wall of China. And please, don't pull out the version card again. The hill has barely changed in 30 years, but suddenly I'm dreaming of mudslides should there come a heavy rain during demolition. Work me through that PTA.
Okay, thank you. Next in line is George Gerstle, followed by Nancy Trigg. George, you should be able to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
Okay, hello, I'm George Gerstle. I live at 3654th Street, which is right west of the creek, right at Linden and 4th Street. I'd like to make 3 or 4 important points that might appear detailed, but are critical. Most important is we are in unincorporated county. We're an island of unincorporated county, and we rely on a relatively shallow well for our drinking water. So it is important that the depth of 2 Mile Creek, which is adjacent to our property, is not lowered, and that it would lower the groundwater level in our shallow well, which we rely on for drinking water. If you want to connect us to the city water, that will be open for discussion as part of the project. The second point is the culvert that's proposed under Linden, which is important to be aligned directly to provide direct connections to the existing end of culvert. As shown on some of the preliminary documents, it would direct the flows directly into our property and require a nearly right angle to get back into the creek. So it's important to align the downstream end of the new culvert with the current culvert. And then finally, this is a really important wildlife corridor, and recognizing that some changes might be necessary. The creek is lined with 30, 40, 50-foot tall trees that provide critical wildlife habitat. So if you need to play around in the creek bottom, it's critical that the existing large trees be maintained and not damaged. So, and we do support the expansion of the sedimentation ponds to the west of Linden. That makes a lot of sense. So those are the critical points that we'd like to make. They may appear to be design details, but they're critical to the continued existence of our home. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We have Nancy Trigg followed by Tim Holbrook. Nancy, you should be able to speak.
Awesome. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. I live along Edgewood on the Reach 6, the lower section of this plan. And it seems to me from what I've seen in all the previous meetings that the plan is dependent on a large amount of additional water being diverted to this creek section. And it feels like the plan itself is not taking into account the actual realities of that section. There is a massive hill. If you look at the plans at Reach 6, it looks like a nice flat little piece of grass. It has a massive hill with 35-degree plus angles in most sections. Any additional water that's pushed down through that channel puts all of those homes along Edgewood at higher risk because you're increasing water flow in an area that has nowhere else to go but into those homes, even if you deepen that area. Every time we've raised questions about the stability of this, what we're just told is, well, the design will tell us the answer of how we're going to do that. But it seems like the whole plan is dependent on understanding what's going to happen in that area down low. And it doesn't seem that the proper engineering work has been done to ensure the stability of that hill, both for the $1 million mansions above the hill and the small homes below it. The only potential remedies that I've heard at all for that is building a wall up that hill. I heard it in one meeting, I can't remember who said it. That obviously is not an amenable situation either. This is a wildlife corridor, it's a protected area. There are constant wildlife back here. It's not a every now and then thing, like every day you go out, you see foxes having babies and lots of deer living back there and bear that hang out in the creek in the summer. And so disrupting this with any kind of wall to make that hill more stable is also not an option. And I just feel like before any plan gets approved, this area needs to be given some serious consideration from an engineering standpoint as to what is viable at all. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you so much. Next up, we have Tim Holbrook, followed by Kirk Vincent.
All right, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Just a quick follow-up on the utility department sending out a letter that you mentioned earlier. It's someone in the city code, whoever, it doesn't matter, just that the RAB recommend that the city does send out a letter for channel maintenance. This is separate and apart from the channel maintenance just discussed in the mitigation plan. This is prior to, because it's going to be several years. And I'm happy to provide the board with a figure. Several municipalities have these available that show what a good channel looks like. They're leaving all of the trees that are greater than 6 inches in terms of what's going to happen now, not with the mitigation. That's a very good question later on. But for the 5 to 10 years it's going to take to do this project, I'd like to see the letter go out with a diagram that clears all the brush and shrubs less than 6 inches diameter. The other question I'd like to ask is, can the utility department confirm where the CU South project fits in the prioritization ranking versus, say, 2 Mile Goose Creek? I'd like someone to answer that. And if it's their intent to complete the prioritization of all 16 drainages prior to making decisions on funding for which a final funding for construction. I understand funding is ongoing for design and concept. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about for large construction activity. Because if I understand it from the master plan, there's $350 million of necessary projects that, contrary to popular belief, will not improve all of the drainages to 100 years, nor any of the piped drainages to close to 100 year, not at all. So be aware that that's some decisions that have been already made about what is needed, but what proportion of that is dedicated to CU South, and is that done, or can that be now reprioritized to put, again, the life safety, critical infrastructure and other things that might have higher priorities than CU South? So that's what I'd like to see. That's all I have to say. I'll yield the rest of my time. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. We have Kirk Vincent followed by Dennis Bashline. And from what I see, those are the last two speakers. So if there are others on the call that are wanting to speak tonight, go ahead and either raise your hand virtually or you can press *6 on your phone. Kirk, you should be able to speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, I muted myself. I can hear you.
Yeah, Kirk Vincent. I first became interested in RAB business because of 2 Mile Canyon Creek. And so in 2015, RAB was asked to approve the updated FEMA map. And the reason I was interested in is that as a geomorphologist, the landform is an alluvial fan, which is characterized by downstream branching flow, and those downstream branches, the channel size gets smaller and smaller. So it's a very complicated site. It's very large and it's complicated, and that kind of explains part of why it's taken a long time to get to this point. And during that whole process, which I played a part in up until now, I actually didn't think it was going to be possible to reach the 100-year level of flood protection. And so I'm pleasantly surprised that we can achieve such a high level of service for our communities. Thank you.
Thanks so much. We do have a few folks that have raised their hands. So I have up next Dennis Bashline, followed by Lynn Siegel. Dennis, you should be able to speak. Dennis, I show that you're muted. Sometimes it's a delay in clicking.
Aha, any better?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, so I understand, that you want to help save properties and stuff up the hill, but I do believe that it's going the wrong direction. The beauty of this hill behind us, that we get to look out at every morning, see different wildlife, at night, cougars even come through. And, just like Nancy said, it's a protected area. It would be horrible to look out our kitchen window to see a wall. And another thing is there are a lot of kids that play on this hill from communities all over the place and close. And for the size wall that you guys would have to build, it'd be horrible if one of the kids are sledding down the wall or sledding down the hill on the snow and went off that wall. It's going to be more of a cliff. It also looks as if it's going to be widened, it's going to take a lot of our property, our pond, our shed, maintenance, just trying to get up in here. There's been literally very little maintenance in the past years. Years ago, they would drive a tractor up it and and clean it out. The private survey that we had done said that Crossroads Mall would be under 11 feet of water before it backed up. The reason the water backed up in 2013 was because the church down the street had put a pallet across the creek so they could cross over it, and it flipped over and plugged the bike path. So I'm just wondering, how can we get around this? Thanks.
Thanks so much. I have up next Lynn Siegel, followed by Eddie Clark. Apologies if I didn't pronounce that correctly. Lynn, you should be able to speak.
Boy, oh boy, the redesigning of an alluvium is very expensive.
Lynn, I'm so sorry to interrupt. You're welcome to keep going, but you mentioned that if you were quiet, I should mention it. So your voice comes across really softly.
Test, 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 test.
We can hear you. It's just quiet. So you might just want to project.
I'm at the top of my volume. Redesigning the alluvium is tricky, of course. But particularly when there's issues of someone downstream getting affected by you. And I mean, this is what's happening. That's, you know, I mean, it's redesigning after the fact. And I saw one slide that said 43 million or something. This is a lot to pay for this redesign versus mitigation of like a couple $100,000 or something. I haven't read the whole background of it, but it seems like a lot of expense removing these 127 or a couple hundred houses that have been built. I don't know. It's a tricky issue. I agree with the person that was talking about the prioritization with this kind of expense. CU should not happen at all. CU should, half of their population their present population should be moving out of Boulder. We haven't got room for a major situation of that many people on this limited area, and particularly that can be inundated by water issues and more atmospheric rivers, that are one after another in California. Why wouldn't we have that too? We could have the same situation happening here. But as far as people having the right, I guess you'd have to present to someone what the downstream effects are going to be. And if they're going to pay for those downstream effects, then yes, they have a right to have their property there and in the way that it is and with their trees and whatever. But if not, then whose responsibility is it? It's not the people downstream from them that are going to be affected. We tend to on the planet, what this country is, mountains and plains. And there are prices to being in the mountains.
Thanks so much, Lynn. I apologize. Your time is up. We do have a couple more commenters on the line. Eddie Clark, followed by Steve LeBlanc. And Eddie, you should be able to talk. And please correct me if I said your name wrong. I do show you still muted. If you can hear me, you'll want to go ahead and unmute and then you can speak. We'll give you just a minute and then maybe we'll move on to Steve and we can circle back.
Here we go. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Excellent. Yes, it is Eddie Clark. Thank you.
Okay. Good.
So number of things I'd like to go through. I've long-term Boulder resident, 25 plus years. In 2013, I was living here on Goose Creek, and our house did not sustain flood damage. A number of the houses here on this block adjacent to the creek did not sustain flood damage. There was, an extreme rain event where the surface, deposition from the rain that affected a lot of people. And I bring that up because not so much just for us, but in the larger study pointed out the millions of dollars of impact and damage. Is there a differentiation between actual flood damage versus rain damage there? So that's just one quick point. When that rain was happening, the Edgewood Drive, there was a lot of water moving down it, more water moving down Edgewood Drive than Goose Creek behind our house. And so when myself and a lot of the other people that live here, we hear some of the feedback from the city about how this worked, well, we're scratching our heads going, well, it's not exactly it. I'd just like to point that out because there's a disparity there, right? That said, there was a lot of flooding. 2 Mile Creek, a lot of that water ran down to lower Goose Creek, right past 24th. And, downstream of Folsom, it really did its job, which was great. Just a point to make in consideration. I don't know that I've seen this addressed so far. Another part, the wildlife, as a lot of people have said, it is a wildlife corridor. There's no public access to that land back there. There's bighorn owls, red-tailed hawks, turkey buzzards, red foxes, gray foxes, mama bears with cubs that come down when they have a hard time foraging if we have a bad spring. It's obvious, like none of us want to see that wildlife impacted, but also weighing the costs and the impact from widening Goose Creek versus, say, keeping 2 Mile Creek under Iris or even under Edgewood, or, there seem to be much more efficient, cost-effective, and environmentally, ecologically sound proposals besides widening the creek.
Thank you so much. I do show Steve LeBlanc as the next speaker. And if there's anybody else, go ahead and indicate by raising your hand virtually or pressing *6 on your phone. And Steve, you should be able to speak now. I do show you unmuted, but we cannot hear you. It's really soft, but
I'll turn it up.
Okay.
How's that?
Better, thank you.
Yeah, Steve LeBlanc, 443 Alpine. Actually, I've been one of the owners at the Ideal Broadway shops on Alpine and Broadway for the past 37 years. And we've been waiting for some improvements to some flood mitigation for the past 37 years. I think this is a good idea and a good start. And so we would support the improvements. I do know that some of the storm drains that run from North Boulder Park under the hospital, which is, I see people repairing those. The drain lines tend to go from anywhere from 36 inches down to 26 inches and are often filled with debris and very, very difficult to maintain. I think that the idea of the large culverts with, and I've asked, they said there would be clean outs in many places so that the maintenance could be kept up when debris got into it. But I myself do support the idea and just wanted to let you know, we've been waiting for some help and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I do show a hand up, but it is from somebody who has already had the chance to speak. So I believe we're limited to one comment period per person, but please correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, that is the plan, Joanna.
Okay, otherwise I am not seeing anybody indicating that they would like to speak.
Thank you, Joanna. Thanks everyone for being here tonight and sharing your perspectives. Before we go to board discussion, Joe, I wanted to just check in and see if you or anyone on your team wanted to respond to any of the comments that we got tonight. There were a couple of themes that came up a number of times, including wildlife habitat and potential impact to those downstream or downhill, and kind of reassurances or when in the process that gets addressed. So I don't know if you want to speak to either of those or other things that came up, but wanted to give you the opportunity.
Yeah, I might want to speak to a few different things and really appreciate the public who showed up tonight and spoke on the project, and helpful to hear the feedback and the critiques and the criticisms. I did want to say one of the earlier commenters, and I'm not sure if the audio was a little spotty in the beginning, but it sounded like, and hopefully I was hearing it wrong, but might have been kind of mocking our staff team. And I just want to say it's really important for us to have positive public engagement, even when there is criticism. So I hope I didn't hear that wrong, but would just ask people to keep that in mind going forward. There were a number of comments as we were going through it. I think one of them that I wrote down was about the flood master plan prioritization formula and whether existing flood projects will be included in that. And when we had a discussion with RAB last year, we committed to all the projects that we'll be bringing forward will apply that prioritization formula. However, projects that we've already are midstream and we've done a lot of investment in, our intention is not to stop those, but we will be transparent with the community and show people how the numbers come out. So that is that one. And then with respect to the wildlife and the environmental impacts of the projects, we absolutely appreciate the impacts that these projects have. And we try to prioritize, even though there's a lot of constraint on the natural floodplains. And I would say take a lot of pride in building environmental features into these projects. And so if you travel along any of the multi-use paths, like the Goose Creek path in the lower portion, you will see a lot of wetlands and things like that that have been created. And we have plenty of opportunity to do that on other projects. And a lot of our environmental permitting, the requirements that we address those things to the satisfaction of the regulating agencies as well is part of it. So Brandon, Debbie,
I think the one, just to clarify, is we did hear from the people along Edgewood that they would like that corridor to remain private and protected. So we did not include an extension of our greenways path from Goose Creek within the recommendation. So I just wanted to flag that one. And just recognizing the engineering challenges around the hillside behind Goose Creek. It is a very difficult engineering challenge, and that's why we'd kind of like to proceed into the next phase of design so we can start working on it.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I guess that takes us to board discussion and potential action. I guess I would just open it up with reminding us that it's on our agenda as an action item, but given the timing, if there is a good amount of discussion, questions, feedback for staff, we do have the opportunity to table this to next month for action. So with that, I guess I will open it up.
Is one theme that seemed to sort of emerge here as well as in some of the communications earlier, et cetera. Maybe just to, not to beat the dead horse here, but seems to be just a concern to make sure that we're using the existing infrastructure as well as we can before starting to think about what additional expenses may be needed or upgrades may be needed. And particularly the issue about the maintenance of some of the existing open channels and so forth. Do you guys feel like you're doing everything that we reasonably can in that area so that we can kind of diffuse that part of the argument here that, we have certain infrastructure and systems in place. We may need to build more, they may be expensive, but clearly one of the themes that's coming through here is making sure that systems we already have in place are working properly.
No, I think it's a fair comment, and the city of Boulder was developed before modern floodplain regulations. So in a lot of cases, we're trying to play catch up. And I think many of the stormwater features that we have in this area just do not have adequate capacity, and they're not continuous through the floodplain. So these projects will address that, and I think will increase capacity and make it continuous so that it'll work better as a system. I would not want to continue to rely on the existing infrastructure, even with enhanced maintenance. Brandon, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is not designed for flood flows. So a lot of the infrastructure that's existing there was designed for stormwater flows, which is a much lesser event. So the improvements we're talking about are really trying to reestablish historically what would have been there prior to development where we can, and then trying to connect those segments. So that's what you'll see in the recommendations. And we do want to look for opportunities to overlap those two recommendations. So any stormwater pipes that would be upsized if they fall along the same alignment, trying to optimize those improvements to be kind of serve two purposes.
And just adding one more thing, I know in the summer, when we have a significant thunderstorm, there's an area that frequently ponds up, and just the capacity to handle those flows, even for more routine storms, it's just not adequate.
Yeah.
And outfalls is just a huge one here. So it's very flat, particularly that section of Upper Goose is very flat. So giving us this improved drainage allows us to maintain outfalls better, which increases the functionality of our stormwater system as well.
One sort of different question related to how does the city work with the private ditch companies in terms of flood? I mean, some of those ditches must act as channels in flood events, and how does that impact city planning, and how do you guys work together with those players to, kind of utilize that infrastructure that's already there in place as a kind of a, add-on infrastructure to the cities in terms of flood control?
Yeah, a lot of cities of Boulder's age, the early plan was to use the irrigation ditches for flood conveyance, but most of them, their capacity is designed based on the water rights that they're intended to convey. There's really no reflection of the kind of the drainage calculations that you would do for flood flows. In some cases, we have ditches that we know carry a lot of city stormwater, and there is excess capacity in them beyond their water rights flows. And so we've made agreements with some of them to convey that flood water, but generally it's not a great plan to rely on the old irrigation ditches to contain or convey flood flows. In a lot of cities, including ours, where there are opportunities to separate them, that's the best approach, separate stormwater from the ditches.
Other comments, thoughts?
I'd like to pursue that suggestion made by members of the public regarding the issue of a potential letter recommendation to City Council for them to write a letter, or perhaps the RAB would write a letter to council. But the gist of it would be to try to step up the efforts on maintenance of the drainages. Joe, you talked about that earlier in the meeting tonight, but could you go over really where the staff stands on the ability to actually implement that? Not implement the letter, but implement the ditch cleaning or drainage cleaning.
Yeah, well, I might speak to the letter too. I think probably I would want to step back and visit with our staff to consider that concept and how it might be done. And so that it could be effective if the board wanted to pursue that. So let us get back to you on that. And then the second part of the question, I'm trying to think how to answer it concisely. We definitely would like to have the opportunity to maintain these channels, but sometimes there are private landowner concerns, and it happens with the irrigation ditches as well. My prior role, I was the water resources manager, and we played a role with all of the ditches. And at times when they try to get in to do the maintenance, there is a big public outcry if understandably, if trees are going to be cut and ground disturbance. And so there's that tension all the time of doing the necessary work versus the understandable public reaction to some of the environmental impacts of that. But our staff would love to have access and to be able to maintain, have landowner agreements, have easements, and be able to maintain the entire drainages. Brandon, Debbie, Chris, let me know if you.
Yeah, I mean, particularly you heard about Goose Creek along this Edgewood stretch. There's a lot of large trees. It really limits our ability to get large equipment back there. And we also have a section with an easement disconnected from city-owned property back there, disconnected from our next easement. So having that kind of patchwork of easements makes it very difficult to do kind of consistent maintenance along the reach like we would like to do for some of these reaches.
Whether a letter would help us in that endeavor or not, again, let us think about that and get back to you.
Is that something you'd be willing to come back to, Rob, and perhaps in the next meeting?
Yeah.
Let us know.
Just one thought on that real quick. I totally agree with the informing residents of maintenance and importance of maintenance. I just worry it is a code violation, right? And this could turn into people like turning in their neighbors because their creeks aren't maintained. I just don't want us to like, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud here. I wouldn't want a bunch of people to get code violation notices because we sent this letter to everyone saying, hey, it's your responsibility or your neighbor's responsibility. So I'm not saying I'm against the letter. I just want to think through any unforeseen consequences.
But it seems like a general public good that a large populace would benefit from to have the drainage way maintenance. And I would say, John, not too different than the code requirements to shovel your walkway after within 24 hours of a storm or keep your trash can closed if you live west of Broadway. Those are all general public goods.
Yeah, no, I totally, I would worry that this is a little more expensive and extensive to maintain like drainage. So I'm not against it. I just want to make sure that we're just thinking through it all. But I agree with the intent for sure.
Yeah, my hope would be that the city would have staff and resources available to go do the maintenance for willing landowners, for those who can't or won't do the maintenance themselves.
And there's been such good public participation during this process. Maybe that suggests that an additional step with additional education around maintenance would be well received.
And Joe, you mentioned earlier that you'd be putting forward a budget item separate and apart from this for additional resources to do more maintenance.
Yes. Yeah, I forget what the mileage number of the flood and drainage ways is.
47,
I was going to
think.
say it's around 50 and we have a lot of requirements because of agreements we've made with ditch companies where we might build something, city might build a feature next to a ditch and then we agree to take on maintenance as a requirement of that. And so we have a lot of that across the city as well.
Okay. So it sounds like there'll be more discussion about a potential letter next month. Other thoughts?
And I would ask my team members who are listening in to help me remember that.
Aaron's got it.
I'll just add, I think I'm echoing one of the public comment that I was skeptical that the city could come with a plan to have 100-year mitigation through a large parts of these areas, and you got pretty much all of it. And I think that's impressive, and I support the plan. I think it's a good plan. There's a lot of details to work out, but I think it's impressive what the city's done, so.
Yeah, I'm in the same place, John. Like, obviously there's some areas of disagreement, some specifics to work out that are really very important. But in general, I think I also hear the importance of moving forward with this kind of type of work, and being able to do so with a plan at this level and scope is really encouraging. So I'm also in favor.
I guess if we're going down the line here. on
Yeah,
this,
you're
and
welcome.
I also support the plan. I think it's a real challenge to devise something, as you all have mentioned, in an already fully built out residential area. And so I think what staff have done has been a very good job so far. I am fairly sensitive to the excellent comments that we've received on this in recently, just today or in the recent days, and hope that should the plan get approved by council, that when you move into the next step, more of the engineering design phases, that these comments that are issued recently don't get lost, don't get forgotten.
Sure. We in the next steps, we'll meet with each property owner and there'll be extensive outreach.
Yeah, I too am in support of the plan and moving forward. And also appreciate that this is very conceptual in nature at first, and there's no guarantee of specific projects moving forward. And that we'll have opportunities in the future to look at what gets prioritized and why, and to weigh in on that as well.
Yeah, and I support the conceptual plan. I mean, I would just underline also Gordon's, that did seem like in some of the input that we had today, and particularly earlier today, that there were some, some good ideas in there to consider. And obviously some of them might be pretty costly, so that might, negate some of the possibilities. But I think I would also just underline that, the people that live right there and have dealt with flood several times may have some insights that haven't occurred to some of us yet, or maybe, help refine some of the thoughts that your engineering folks have already had. So we should just keep those in mind.
Great, thank you. Well, with those comments, it seems like there's general consensus. I know the staff included in our summary memo, a potential motion, which was the RAB recommends approval of the Upper Goose Creek, the Tamaki Creek Flood Mitigation Plan. Folks be comfortable with such a recommendation? Yes.
Yes.
Great, I think we need a motion.
I'll make a motion. That the Water Resources Advisory Board recommends approval of the Upper Goose Creek and 2 Mile Canyon Creek Flood Mitigation Plan.
I second the motion.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Just kidding. Motion passes 5-0. Thanks, RAB members, and again, thank you to all of you who came and provided public comment tonight and all throughout the process. Please continue to stay engaged as the Utilities Department moves into the project phases. As you heard, your comments are really valued and all throughout the process. So thank you. All right. Next up is matters from the board. Any items from the board?
I had one minor matter that came up, and that is that on last Friday, there's a front page article in the Daily Camera that noted some residents who appear to be within the city limits, but are somehow provided bottled water, or not bottled water, but water by a water company, A1 Water or something like that. How that company was now no longer delivering service. And maybe it was the way the article was written, but it confused me quite a bit because I wasn't aware that there were dwellings within the city limits that were not on city water. So could you clarify that issue?
Yeah, I will try. Thank you for that opportunity. So prior to the pandemic, we used to have our RAB meetings out at the Municipal Service Center on Pearl Parkway. And we have 2 filling stations out there where water haulers, the big trucks with the tanks on the back, can go and fill up and deliver that water. And so there are some properties within the city not on city water. And that water can be delivered outside of the city with some limitations. It can't be delivered to customers west of the blue line because and the blue line is basically the western boundary of the city. And it can't be used for certain business types like marijuana grow houses or oil and gas. And so there's that, but other people, if they have a house that's on a cistern, they might be in the county or something like that, they can do business with one of these private haulers and fill up their tanks for their water needs. And so one of the delivery companies was kind of planning to reduce its distribution area and sent a email communication on fairly short notice to all of their customers. I'm not laughing about people losing service, but the short notice kept us quite busy last week, communicating with people and trying to help them out and give them information of what their alternatives were. So, and some of the properties are in a mapped zoning situation where they're eligible for annexation into the city in connection to city services.
Where are those located?
Now you stumped me on that one. Joanna Bloom, Joanna, you're on the phone. You were helping me a lot with that. I'm trying to remember.
They're on Bellevue, I believe, most of them, which I believe is in the Chautauqua area, but I can confirm. But they're newly in the city limits as the blue line location has changed. And so they're more recently eligible for annexation.
Yeah, now I'm remembering, and some on the very southern part of town near Shanahan Ridge. And so the hauling company caught their customers' attention, and like I said, we were quite busy last week.
All right, matters from staff.
All right, I've got a few, and Tricia, we don't want to let you go, so we're going to keep you for extra innings tonight. But I'll try to be quick. The first one is a heads up on public notice that's going out on some compliance violations we have related to water quality. Fortunately, and I'll explain, not public health concerns, but more of the reporting nature. And so all of our customers will be receiving an annual water quality report that'll be going out in the next few weeks. And they fall into 2 categories, the violations. The first is all commercial entities like restaurants that are connected to our drinking water system are required to have backflow prevention devices so that they can't push stuff back into our drinking water system, which makes sense. There are roughly 7,000 of those in the city, and we have a regulatory compliance role in making sure that a certain percentage of them have documented tests that are submitted by their owners to us each year. And in 2021 and 2022, we didn't meet the required percentages, or in one case, we didn't meet them on time. And so we're required by the state to give notice to all of our customers. I'll note that the state compliance requirements have been becoming more stringent over the years, going from 60% compliance required in 2016 to 90% currently. So the irony for us is we've actually been working on upping our game in this program and are testing more devices than we ever have, but we've fallen off with compliance. There are definitely some important public health goals embedded in the state's program and why we're required to do that. And we take compliance seriously. And we're taking several immediate steps to improve the program. And again, in terms of public health, we do test our distribution system water quality weekly and don't have any evidence of any contamination. So in this instance, it's a reporting situation. A second one has to do.
Joe, sorry to interrupt. Before you go, you mentioned the new compliance percentage is 90%. I think that you're at like 88%, just to give folks like a relative nature of how where you are and seeing that you're very close.
Well, for one of the years, it was 88% at the deadline, and after a little extended time, we were up to 95%, but the state still considers it a violation. And so the second thing has to do with chlorine monitoring. We had a June 2022 power outage at our Boulder Reservoir water treatment plant, and we went 9 hours without our chlorine monitoring instrumentation working. And again, from the state's perspective, that is a violation that requires no notice to our customers. However, we know from our other information that disinfection was continuously maintained during that time from our chlorine feed data and the levels before and after. So the issue was with monitoring, and we now have an uninterruptible power supply on this monitoring equipment, and have taken some other measures to address the issue. So there again, nothing that the community needs to be concerned about in terms of public health or that they had bad water for a period of time. But it is a reporting situation and we're required to provide notice. And so that'll be in our upcoming water quality report, as I said, in the next few weeks. The next item is one that we've talked about a number of times, and I know there's been public interest and concern, and that is the PFAS issue. And so the new thing, and why we're bringing this up, is that the EPA is proposing new drinking water standards for PFAS, I think in six different compounds. And so we're monitoring those regulations, and may or may not comment. And if we do, it'll likely be through trade organizations. And just for public awareness, in terms of what we already do, in 2023, the city is conducting quarterly drinking water sampling for 29 PFAS compounds with EPA's unregulated contaminant monitoring rule in mind. And we expect those results in May. And a few years ago, when this really became an item of public interest and we started talking about it, just to note, we've shared before that the city has participated in a voluntary state-sponsored program to test for PFAS in drinking water, and we have not found any detections. The last couple of items, we talked a lot during the flood mitigation plan about costs in general tonight. And I've mentioned under a previous matters update that we are starting to unfortunately see cost escalation, as others are around the country in our construction projects. We just recently, since the last board meeting, received a bid for our main sewer project. Came in at $44 million compared to the $33 million we have budgeted. So that's a significant overage. And the second one is a project, again, on the wastewater system that's currently in design, our phosphorus upgrades project. And 60% costs are being flagged for us during design by the team that's working on that as $23.5 million compared to $15 million from our previous estimates. So we're starting to see those trends. As I mentioned last month, we'll be looking very closely at our CIP for the 6 years that we bring to RAV this year. and thinking about timing and wanting to manage rates for our customers, but also how we can move these important infrastructure projects forward. So that was a lightning round of a number of topics under matters. Questions about that?
I'm just glad 2 and 3 were water quality items.
Well, not of that nature, not,
Well, yeah.
not my favorite to report on. And
Joe, I did have one minor follow-up question.
Sure.
On those matters. With the PFAS, I think it was Tuesday last week that the EPA came out with their proposed new drinking water standards for several of those compounds. And previously, at least 2 of the PFAS compounds had drinking water advisories of 70 parts per trillion. And now these new guidelines went down to 4. So that's more than an order of magnitude drop in the approvable concentration. And that this was guidance set out for, I think they plan to make a decision in a year. So we don't have to jump on it. But has the city thought at all about what it would do if that concentration level for those compounds actually is enacted?
we have, and I have more detailed notes on that, but I think our intention is just to monitor the updated guidelines. And we don't think this is a prominent issue for the city of Boulder. So in terms of prioritizing what we pay super close attention to and engage in versus more passive, this is probably of the latter category. But I think as our team looks at it, if we start to have those concerns, we'll engage more.
Could I chime in a little bit? So the proposed MCL is 4 parts per trillion, which is about the detection level, right? And so I think what Joe was saying is based on previous testing anyways, it has shown no detect, right? So I think we would not expect to have to treat in order to meet a standard of 4 if it were to go into effect.
It's, thank you for that clarification. It's hard to imagine that the water doesn't have any PFAS in it, because from what I understand, those compounds are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. They're in all of us. They're potentially in the air we breathe. So I would be very surprised if it could be an issue if the detection limits were higher than the detectable concentrations at this point.
I would say it absolutely could be that, and they're ubiquitous, but they're all human caused, right? So if you think about where Boulder's water source is coming from, right? The Sugarloaf does have detection because there's like a fire district in the area, right? But so since our water is coming from higher up in the watershed, I'm not sure actually that we would have significant sources.
That's a good
right?
point. Yeah.
It's given me some reassurance as I've been thinking of this for years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Would you like me to move to the upcoming agenda?
Yes, unless there's other questions. Yes.
All right, for the April meeting, we will have the swearing in of a new board member and election of officers. We currently have slated the Nederland wastewater IGA, which I need to confirm we will be doing. And then every April, we have a water supply update. And if you've turned on the news or the weather this winter at all, it just keeps snowing, which is a good thing. Good thing if you're in the water supply business, not so much if you're in the snow plowing. And then in May, we'll start the 3-meeting series on the CIP, just kind of an overview of where we left off last year and kicking off that process. A potential financial policy update as well. And then one of the projects is related to infrastructure grants and requires a public meeting. And so it's not really affiliated with any board action that's required. And sometimes we will have a meeting like that, say from 5 to 6 o'clock on our own before a board meeting. We've done that kind of thing before, and then convene the board meeting and like we normally would. And certainly the RAB members would be welcome to attend that. And then June, we usually dedicate solely to the CIP because that's the 6-year CIP. That's where we really dig into the projects the most and come back the following month and look for a recommendation. And so with that, we have the upcoming agenda.
Right, thank you. Any final business before we adjourn? Motion to adjourn? Been our motioner.
Make a motion to adjourn.
A second motion.
All right, thank you. All in favor? Aye. Yeah, stand adjourned. Thanks, everyone.